Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we're spending some quiet time with something many people return to without really planning to. Baking tends to appear in our lives during slower hours. Late evenings when the day has finally settled. Weekends when the pace softens. Moments when things feel heavy or uncertain or simply too loud. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. Without much thought, people reach for flour, sugar, butter, a bowl, a familiar recipe. Not because they need to cook, but because something about baking feels different. There is a particular calm that comes with it. Not the kind that demands attention or effort, but the kind that forms quietly while your hands are already busy. Measuring, pouring, stirring, folding. Movements that repeat without surprise. The steps are known before they begin, and the order rarely changes. This predictability matters more than we usually realize. When tasks follow a clear sequence, the mind doesn't have to worry for what comes next. There are fewer decisions to weigh, fewer outcomes to evaluate. Repetition lowers cognitive load, allowing attention to soften instead of sharpen. Baking stands apart from many other forms of cooking for this reason. It doesn't ask for improvisation. It doesn't reward last-minute changes. Instead, it invites trust in a process that has already been tested countless times. A recipe becomes a kind of external structure, holding the sequence steady so the baker doesn't have to. This steady structure reduces uncertainty, and with less uncertainty, the body naturally eases its vigilance. Often, baking happens in a quieter kitchen. The lights are softer. The counters are familiar. Bowls, spoons, measuring cups rest where they always do. These familiar objects act as visual anchors, signaling safety through recognition. The environment doesn't compete for attention. There is space between sounds. Even the movements themselves tend to be small and contained. Gentle rotations of the wrist, slow presses of dough. These cyclical motions engage the body without stimulating it, activating motor patterns that are rhythmic rather than reactive. There is also something important waiting at the end of baking that makes the entire process feel grounded. Baking doesn't end in abstraction. It ends in something tangible. A loaf cooling on a rack, cookies resting on parchment, a cake settling as it releases heat. The body responds to this kind of completion. Anticipation resolves into a visible result. The nervous system registers closure, not as excitement, but as quiet satisfaction. Warmth, sweetness, texture, a physical reward that doesn't need explanation. Smell often arrives before sight. As heat activates sugars and fats, aromatic compounds travel through the air, filling the space gradually. The olfactory system connects directly to emotional and memory centers in the brain, bypassing conscious analysis. This is why the scent of baking can feel comforting before we even know why. The aroma becomes an early signal that something nourishing is forming, that warmth is present, that time is moving in a predictable direction. Baking is also something that doesn't always happen alone. Sometimes it unfolds side by side with someone else. Friends, family, loved ones, each person focused on a small part of the process. One measuring, one stirring, one waiting near the oven. Conversation isn't required for connection to happen. Shared activity like this reduces social vigilance because attention stays on the task, not on performance. Standing together, working quietly, allows presence without pressure. And often, the result of baking is meant to move outward. The finished item doesn't always stay with the baker. It's wrapped, placed on a plate, offered to someone else. Giving food is one of the oldest forms of communication humans have. It carries nourishment without words. From a biological perspective, offering completed food reinforces safety and belonging. It signals that resources are available, that care has already been taken. This kind of giving doesn't demand conversation or explanation. The object itself carries the message. All of this is part of why baking returns to people again and again. It works whether you are alone or together. It offers comfort during the process and something real at the end. It allows effort to resolve into warmth, sweetness, and completion. There is no need to be skilled, no requirement to be creative. Just a sequence that begins, unfolds, and finishes, the same way it has for generations. Baking doesn't rush. Heat does its work at its own pace. Ingredients transform without being watched. Time passes without needing to be filled. And when it's done, something remains. Something you can keep. Something you can share. Something that simply exists, finished and waiting. Baking, at its core, is a very specific kind of action. It is not simply cooking, and it is not improvisation. Baking is the use of enclosed heat, time, and measured ingredients to create a predictable transformation. Something soft becomes structured. Something loose becomes whole. The process relies on patience rather than adjustment, and on sequence rather than choice. Unlike many forms of cooking, baking does not respond moment by moment to taste or instinct. It does not ask for constant checking or correction. Instead, it asks for preparation at the beginning, and then trust. Ingredients are measured before they meet one another. Heat is set before the process begins. Time is decided in advance. Once these conditions are in place, the work shifts away from the baker and into the environment itself. This distinction matters. In cooking, heat is often applied directly and adjusted frequently. Flavors are tested. Seasoning changes. Decisions remain active throughout. Baking, by contrast, removes most decision-making after the initial setup. The oven becomes the agent of change. The baker steps back. The mind no longer needs to intervene. Historically, this approach emerged alongside the development of hearths and early ovens. A hearth was the built-in stone or clay area inside early homes where fires were kept for warmth and cooking. Unlike open flames outdoors, a hearth held heat in place. Walls and surfaces contained warmth so it could be used steadily over time. This enclosure made transformation more reliable. Instead of reacting to shifting flames or wind, people could rely on a space that stayed warm long enough for food to change on its own. Contained heat changed how people related to time. With an enclosed fire or oven, there was less need for constant attention. Heat could be set and then left to do its work. This allowed early bakers to step away, to wait, and to trust that the process would continue without supervision. Baking became a method where preparation happened first and patience followed. At its simplest, baking requires very little: a source of heat, an enclosed space, basic ingredients, grain or flour, fat, liquid, time. These elements are combined not for immediate consumption, but for delayed reward. This delay is central to what baking is. The act itself is separated from the result. The work is done first, and the outcome arrives later, complete and unchanged by further effort. Chemically, baking is straightforward. Heat causes expansion. Proteins set. Starches absorb moisture and firm. Gases form and become trapped. Structure emerges. Once the conditions are right, these changes proceed without guidance. This simplicity is part of baking's endurance. The same principles apply across centuries, cultures, and kitchens. The method remains stable even as flavors and forms vary. Experientially, however, baking feels rich. This richness does not come from complexity, but from contrast. Dry becomes moist. Pale becomes golden. Liquid becomes solid. These changes happen slowly enough to be anticipated, but clearly enough to be noticed. There is no need to interpret them. It is enough to know that transformation is underway. Baking also creates a clear boundary between preparation and waiting. Once something enters the oven, the work pauses. There is nothing more to add, nothing to adjust. This pause is not empty. It is purposeful. The waiting has a known length and a known outcome. Time is not uncertain. It is measured and contained, just like the heat. Predictable processes tend to quiet internal monitoring. When a task no longer requires active control, the brain releases its need to evaluate each step. Conditions have already been set. Attention can soften without drifting, because nothing new is being asked. There is clarity in what baking produces. The result is singular. A loaf, a cake, a tray of cookies. Unlike dishes that remain adjustable until the end, baked goods arrive finished. This finality matters. Completion provides a clear signal that effort has resolved. The process has ended. Something remains. Because of this, baking often feels quieter than other kitchen activities. Sounds are fewer once preparation is complete. Movement slow. The oven hums steadily, holding the work inside. The environment carries the process while the baker waits nearby or steps away. Nothing demands reaction. Nothing escalates. Understanding what baking actually is helps explain why it has lasted. It is a method that removes urgency. It transfers responsibility from the individual to the environment. It relies on stability rather than skill. Heat, time, and enclosure do not rush. They repeat what has always worked. Long before baking was associated with sweetness or comfort, it existed for a simpler reason. People needed food that would last. Early grains were difficult to eat raw. They were hard, dry, unforgiving. When grain was crushed and mixed with water, it became workable. When that mixture met heat, it changed, slowly, reliably. The earliest forms of baking were not elaborate. They did not involve sugar or decoration. They were flat mixtures of grain and water, placed near warmth and left to firm. These early baked foods were dense. plain, practical. They were cooked on hot stones, pressed against warm clay, laid near enclosed fire. This mattered because open flame required constant attention. Food cooked over fire could burn suddenly. Heat shifted with wind and fuel. Enclosed heat changed that relationship. Early hearths, stone or clay spaces built into shelters to hold fire, allowed warmth to stay in place. Heat no longer had to be chased. It could be trusted. With heat held steady, food could transform without constant watching. This reliability reduced effort. It also reduced uncertainty. For early humans, that was significant. Baking did not demand reaction. It demanded preparation and then waiting. Grain was gathered, crushed, mixed. Then it was left to heat. Time did the rest. This separation between effort and outcome became central to baking's role. Work happened first. Waiting followed. The result arrived complete. Archaeological evidence suggests that baking practices emerged independently in multiple regions. Wherever grain cultivation appeared, baking soon followed. This convergence matters. It suggests baking was not a cultural accident. It was a solution. Heat, time, enclosure. These elements solved the same problem again and again. How to turn raw grain into dependable nourishment. Early baking was often communal. Grain was processed together. Ovens or hearths were shared. Tasks were divided naturally. One person ground grain, another mixed, another tended heat. Conversation was not required. The structure of the work guided participation. This kind of parallel labor supported cooperation without strain. Each person knew their role. The process carried everyone forward. Over time, techniques refined themselves. Surfaces became smoother. Heat was distributed more evenly. Timing became more consistent. None of this required theory. It came from repetition. What worked was repeated. What failed was adjusted. Knowledge lived in the hands, in timing, in feel. As societies became more settled, baking became regular rather than occasional. Grain could be stored. Ovens became permanent. Baking shifted from emergency nourishment to daily routine. This regularity shaped how time was experienced. Grinding took time. Heating took time. Waiting could not be skipped. The pace of baking matched the pace of early life. It did not rush. It did not escalate. Importantly, early baking was not about pleasure. It was about reliability. Sweetness came later. Refinement came later. Celebration came later. First, baking had to work. And it did. It produced consistent results from simple inputs. It reduced uncertainty around food. It created something stable from something raw. That reliability built trust across generations. Even as cultures changed, the structure remained. Even as ingredients varied, the method stayed familiar. Heat, time, enclosure, waiting. Understanding where baking began explains why it still feels grounding now. It began as a way to create certainty, to turn effort into something dependable, to let the environment take over once preparation was complete. Before baking became comforting, it was stabilizing. Before it was sweet, it was sustaining. That lineage still lingers. When something enters the oven and the waiting begins, the mind recognizes the pattern. Preparation is finished. The process is underway. Nothing needs to be done. From its earliest forms, baking carried the same quiet assurance it does today. Set the conditions. Wait patiently. Something nourishing will arrive. Baking did not begin as a solitary act. In its earliest forms, it was something people did together. Grain was harvested collectively. It was carried back to shared spaces. It was processed where others were already working. Early ovens and hearths were not private. They were communal structures. Built once, used by many. A single source of heat could serve an entire group. This made baking efficient. It also made it social in a very specific way. Not conversational, not expressive, coordinated. Each person had a role. Someone crushed grain into flour. Someone carried water. Someone mixed. Someone tended the heat. The tasks were clear. The sequence was familiar. No one needed to explain what came next. This mattered in early communities, where survival depended on cooperation without friction. Baking supported that. It created work that could be shared without negotiation. Parallel labor, guided by the process itself. When tasks are structured this way, attention stays on the work, not on personalities, not on emotion. Anthropological studies of early food preparation show that shared, repetitive tasks reduce conflict within groups. Clear roles limit uncertainty. Predictable outcomes reduce tension. Baking fit naturally into this pattern. It required timing rather than opinion, sequence rather than debate. Heat was tended carefully, but not constantly. Once the food was placed near or inside the oven, people could step back. Waiting happened together. This shared waiting was important. It allowed people to remain near one another without active interaction. Presence without demand. Bodies occupied the same space. Attention rested on the same outcome. Food was forming. The environment carried the process forward. Early baking spaces encouraged this kind of quiet co-presence. Stone surfaces, clay walls, limited tools. There was little excess stimulation. No noise beyond fire and movement. No urgency once preparation was complete. The pace of baking matched the pace of group life. Work unfolded slowly. Waiting was expected. This rhythm supported stability. Shared baking also created shared trust. When food is prepared collectively, responsibility is distributed. No single person carries the full burden of outcome. If something worked, everyone benefited. If something failed, no one was singled out. This diffusion of responsibility reduced stress around food production. It also reinforced cooperation. People learned to rely on the process rather than individual control. Over time, this shaped cultural patterns. Baking became embedded in daily routines not because it was enjoyable, but because it worked well within groups. It allowed many people to contribute without crowding one another. It produced enough food to share. It resolved effort into a visible result. Importantly, early baking did not demand constant social exchange. There was no need to speak continuously. Silence was not awkward. The work itself justified quiet. This made baking accessible across ages and roles. Children could help. Elders could wait nearby. tasks adjusted naturally to ability. The process held everyone together without requiring sameness. As communities grew more complex, this pattern remained. Even when baking moved into individual homes, the memory of shared preparation lingered. Many later traditions preserved communal ovens, village bake days, shared firing times. These practices reinforced the idea that baking was something that connected people through structure, not conversation. The connection came from alignment, not from interaction. Everyone trusted the same heat, the same timing, the same outcome. This form of togetherness is different from celebration or gathering. It is quieter. It allows people to be near one another, without attention being exchanged directly. That distinction matters. Shared baking supported social stability because it lowered social demand. It allowed connection to exist without emotional labor. This is one reason baking has remained a shared activity across cultures. It adapts easily to groups because it does not require coordination beyond the process itself. The method leads, people follow. Even now, when baking happens in modern kitchens, traces of this remain. People stand side by side, hands busy, eyes focused outward. Conversation comes and goes. The task continues regardless. This echoes its origins. From the beginning, baking was a way for people to work together without strain, to share effort, to share waiting, to share outcome. The process did not require closeness to function. It only required participation. That quiet form of cooperation is part of baking's inheritance. It explains why baking together still feels calm rather than crowded. Why presence does not become pressure. Why the mind can remain settled even when others are nearby. From its earliest communal ovens, baking offered a simple structure. Do the work together. Wait together. Let heat finish what hands began. And trust that something nourishing will be ready when the time has passed. Baking knowledge did not begin on paper. For most of human history, there were no written recipes. What people knew about baking lived in movement, in timing, in observation. Children learned by watching hands, by standing nearby, by repeating small tasks long before they understood the whole. Grain was ground the same way each time. Dough was mixed until it felt right. Heat was judged by distance and duration. These patterns were not explained in words. They were demonstrated. This mattered because it allowed baking knowledge to pass smoothly across generations. No interpretation was required, only attention. Early baking instructions were embedded in routine. Do it this way, then wait, then do the next thing. The sequence carried meaning without commentary. This form of transmission reduced variation. When knowledge is passed through repetition rather than description, it stays stable. Small adjustments happen naturally, but the core remains intact. Baking benefited from this stability. Because the method worked, it was repeated. Because it was repeated, it became familiar. Because it was familiar, it was trusted. Over time, these repeated actions formed a kind of collective memory. Even without writing, people knew when something was ready. They knew how long heat should last. They knew when waiting was complete. This knowing did not require conscious recall. It lived in the body. Hands recognized texture. Eyes recognized color. ears recognize subtle changes in sound. The absence of written instruction meant that baking adapted gently to local conditions. Different grains, different heat sources, different climates. The structure remained the same, even as details shifted. When written recipes eventually appeared, they did not replace this embodied knowledge. They recorded it. Early recipes were brief, sparse, assumptive. They listed ingredients and basic steps, but they relied on prior understanding. They assumed the reader already knew what dough should feel like. They assumed familiarity with heat and timing. This is important. Written recipes did not introduce complexity. They preserved continuity. They allowed methods to travel farther, across regions, across households, across time. As societies became more connected, recipes began to move between families and cultures. But even then, baking retained its predictability. Instructions followed the same basic structure: prepare, combine, heat, wait. This consistency made baking resilient. When people moved or migrated, baking traveled with them. Methods adjusted to new ingredients, but the sequence stayed intact. This helped baking remain recognizable even as environments changed. The act of teaching baking also reinforced calm. Learning happened slowly. Correction was gentle. Mistakes were absorbed into the process rather than punished. If something did not work, it was adjusted the next time. No urgency, no evaluation. This forgiving structure encouraged participation. People could help without pressure. They could learn without performance. Baking knowledge was shared in moments that did not demand focus or explanation, while other tasks unfolded, while conversation drifted. This low-demand learning environment supported long-term retention. Repetition, not instruction, did the work. Over generations, this created a quiet confidence around baking. People trusted the method because it had always been done this way. They trusted the outcome because it had always arrived. This trust reduced uncertainty. When baking began, people knew what would happen next. They knew how long it would take. They knew what would emerge. That certainty mattered in daily life. It meant nourishment could be counted on. It meant effort would resolve. Even today, traces of this transmission remain. People bake recipes they have made many times before. They adjust without thinking. They know when something is ready without checking the time. This is inherited knowledge, even when it is not consciously recognized. Baking methods persist because they are easy to pass on. They do not require explanation to work. They do not demand precision to succeed. They rely on repetition, patience, and observation. That simplicity allowed baking to survive across centuries without losing its shape. From hands to hands, from one generation to the next, the knowledge stayed intact because the process carried it forward. Do it this way. Wait. Then do the next thing. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. And when the time passed, something familiar appeared, just as it always had. That continuity is part of what makes baking feel steady now. The mind recognizes the sequence, even if it cannot name it. The pattern has been learned before, and it still works. Sweet baking arrived much later than baking itself. For a long time, baked food was not meant to please. It was meant to last, to sustain, to carry energy forward. Sweetness was rare. Early sweeteners came from honey, fruit, or concentrated sap. They were seasonal, difficult to collect, limited in supply. Because of this, sweetness was not everyday nourishment. It was reserved. When sweet ingredients did appear in baking, they marked something different. A pause, a gathering, a moment set apart from routine. This shift mattered. Sweet baking did not replace practical baking. It layered meaning on top of it. The same methods were used, the same heat, the same waiting. But the intention changed. In many early societies, sweet-baked foods appeared during celebrations, harvest festivals, religious observances, transitions between seasons. Sweetness signaled abundance. Biologically, this made sense. Sweet flavors are energy-dense. They provide quick fuel. They register strongly in the body. In times when food was uncertain, sweetness communicated safety. Enough had been gathered. Enough could be shared. Baking became the container for this signal. Raw sweetness could spoil quickly. Heat stabilized it. Grain gave it structure. By baking sweet ingredients into bread or cakes, people preserve value. They turn something fragile into something lasting. This preservation added weight to the act. Sweet-baked foods were not rushed. They were prepared carefully, often in larger quantities, often for others. Because sweet ingredients were limited, sweet baking carried intention. It was planned, anticipated. Waiting mattered even more. The time between preparation and completion created expectation. The outcome was known, but not immediate. This delay amplified meaning without increasing urgency. People gathered while waiting, not to watch closely, but to remain nearby. The oven worked quietly. The sweetness developed slowly. Across cultures, similar patterns emerged. Honey cakes, fruit-filled breads, early pastries, different flavors, same structure. Sweet baking appeared wherever surplus allowed for it, where grain stores were stable, where heat could be trusted. This convergence suggests that sweet baking was not accidental. It was a natural extension of an already reliable method. Once baking had proven itself dependable, it could carry more than nourishment. It could carry pleasure. Importantly, sweetness did not change the pace of baking. The process remained slow, measured, predictable. Sweetness was added, but urgency was not. This preserved baking's calming structure even as its emotional role expanded. Sweet-baked foods also changed how baking related to memory. Because they were not everyday items, they stood out. They were remembered. The smell of sweet baking became associated with specific moments, specific people, specific times of year. These associations formed quietly. No explanation was required. The mind learned to link sweetness with safety and completion, with effort resolving into reward. Sweet baking reinforced the idea that waiting was worthwhile. Preparation led somewhere pleasant. Patience was honored. This mattered psychologically. When effort reliably leads to reward, trust deepens. Not excitement, trust. Sweet baking strengthened that trust. It did not interrupt routine. It punctuated it. Even as sweet ingredients became more accessible over time, the structure held. Cakes and pastries entered daily life, but they retained their symbolic weight. They were still used to mark moments, to offer care, to celebrate without noise. The act of baking something sweet remained deliberate. Measured ingredients, set heat, defined time. The environment still took over once preparation was complete. Sweetness did not make baking stimulating. It made it meaningful. It gave the process a visible reward without changing its rhythm. This is why sweet baking feels comforting rather than exciting. It combines anticipation with certainty, pleasure with patience, the same slow heat, the same waiting. But now, something gentle is promised at the end. Understanding when sweet baking emerged helps explain its emotional role today. It was never about indulgence alone. It was about signaling that enough had been gathered, that effort could pause, that something good was coming. When sweetness enters the oven, the mind recognizes the pattern. Preparation is finished. Waiting begins. Reward is on its way. Nothing needs to be rushed. The structure has held for centuries, and it still does. Across cultures and centuries, the same ingredients appear again and again, not by coincidence, by convergence. Flour, fat, sweetener. These three elements form the core of most baked foods, regardless of place or time. Different names, different sources, the same structure. Flour came first. Grain was one of the earliest reliable food sources humans cultivated. It could be dried, stored, transported. When ground, it became flexible. Flour absorbed liquid easily. It responded to heat predictably. It formed structure when baked. This made it ideal. Across regions, flour took different forms. Wheat, barley, rice, maize, different grains, same role. They provided bulk. They held shape. They made nourishment portable. Fat came next. Fat added density. It slowed drying. It softened texture. Early fats came from animals, nuts, seeds, or later, dairy. Butter, rendered fat. Oils pressed by hand. Fat made baked food more satisfying. It increased energy value. It extended freshness. From a biological perspective, fat signals safety. It tells the body that energy is available, that effort will last. This mattered deeply in environments where food was not guaranteed. Sweetener arrived last. Honey, fruit, later sugar. Sweetness was not necessary for structure. It was necessary for meaning. Sweetener transformed baked food from sustenance into something more. It marked difference. It marked intention. Across cultures, sweeteners were limited at first, used carefully, saved for moments that mattered. This scarcity gave sweet baking weight. What is remarkable is how consistently these three elements were combined. Wherever baking appeared, flour provided structure. Fat provided softness and staying power. Sweetener provided signal. This convergence suggests a shared solution. Humans did not need to communicate across continents to arrive here. The materials themselves guided the process. Flour responds well to heat. Fat improves texture and preservation. Sweetness reinforces reward. Together, they produce something dependable. The proportions varied. The flavors changed. The structure held. This stability allowed baking to travel. When people migrated, they carried the method with them. They adapted to local ingredients, but preserved the pattern. If wheat was unavailable, another grain replaced it. If honey was scarce, fruit was used. If butter was absent, oil or rendered fat filled the role. The formula remained recognizable. This adaptability explains why baking persisted across climates and cultures. It did not depend on a single ingredient. It depended on roles. Something to hold shape, something to soften, something to signal value. Because these roles could be filled in many ways, baking remained resilient. The process tolerated variation without collapsing. This tolerance reduced pressure. Bakers did not need perfection. They needed balance. This forgiving nature made baking accessible. It allowed people to participate without specialized tools or knowledge. The ingredients themselves guided the outcome. Over time, this familiarity became embedded. Hands learned how flour should feel. Eyes learned how fat should coat. Taste learned when sweetness was enough. These cues required no explanation. They were learned through repetition. This is why baking often feels intuitive, even to those who do not bake often. The core ingredients behave in ways the body already understands. They respond slowly. They change predictably. Nothing demands sudden correction. Even when modern baking introduces refined ingredients, the ancient structure remains. White flour replaces stone ground grain. Refined sugar replaces honey. Butter is measured precisely, but the roles do not change. Structure, softness, reward. The body responds to these combinations the same way it always has. That continuity matters. It means baking carries forward an inherited logic, one that was shaped by survival, refined by repetition, and preserved by reliability. The ingredients did not just feed people. They taught people what worked. And because they worked, they were kept. When flour, fat, and sweetener come together, the mind recognizes the pattern. This combination has appeared before, many times, across places and lives. It signals that nourishment is being prepared in a familiar way, that the process will hold, that waiting will be rewarded. This is why baked foods feel comforting even before they are finished. The ingredients themselves carry history. They carry repetition. They carry trust. And when they meet heat and time, they produce something that has always made sense. Not because it is exciting, but because it is dependable. A structure that endured because it worked. Once the ingredients are prepared, baking hands its work to heat, not open flame, not shifting fire. Enclosed warmth. The oven changed everything. Early ovens were simple. Stone-lined pits, clay chambers, thick walls that trapped heat and released it slowly. This enclosure mattered. Open fire is unpredictable. Flames rise and fall, wind interferes, fuel shifts. Enclosed heat behaves differently. Once warmed, it stays warm. Once stable, it changes slowly. This stability allowed transformation to happen evenly. Instead of reacting to heat, food could receive it. Baking relies on this steady transfer. Heat surrounds rather than strikes. It moves inward at a measured pace. This gentleness is part of baking's character. As ovens developed, so did trust. People learned how long heat lasted, They learned how surfaces retained warmth. They learned when an oven was ready. These cues became familiar. The work of baking shifted further away from the hands. Once something entered the oven, there was little left to do. This separation is important. The moment food goes into the oven marks a transition. Preparation ends. Waiting begins. The environment takes over. Time becomes measurable. Minutes matter, but not urgently. They pass in known intervals. This is different from waiting without certainty. In baking, waiting has a defined shape. There is an expected outcome, a known window. This predictability reduces vigilance. The body does not brace for surprise. Heat continues to work whether watched or not. Inside the oven, quiet changes occur. Liquids warm and expand. Gases form and spread. Structures begin to set. None of this requires intervention. The transformation follows physical laws that do not rush. Once conditions are right, the process unfolds on its own. This autonomy is part of baking's endurance. It allows the baker to step back without loss of control. The oven holds responsibility. As heat works, time stretches. Not because it slows, but because nothing else demands attention. There is no need to check constantly, no need to adjust. This absence of demand creates space. People often use this space to sit nearby, to clean, to rest. The waiting is purposeful. The oven becomes a quiet presence in the room. It hums. It radiates warmth. It signals that something is underway. Sound remains steady. Temperature remains contained. These signals reinforce safety. Nothing escalates. Across cultures, the oven took many forms. Tandoors, stone hearths, brick ovens, different shapes. Same function. They enclosed heat long enough for transformation to complete. This convergence matters. It shows that humans consistently sought ways to stabilize heat. Because stabilized heat simplified life. It reduced attention costs. It reduced error. It reduced strain. Over time, ovens became central to daily routines. They marked certain parts of the day. They gathered people briefly, then allowed them to disperse. The oven did not demand presence. It only required patience. This pattern shaped how baking fit into life. It was not rushed between tasks. It was integrated. Heat rose, food entered, waiting followed. The predictability of this sequence mattered. It allowed planning. It allowed overlap. Other tasks could continue while baking progressed. This made baking compatible with daily rhythms rather than disruptive. Even now, modern ovens preserve this structure. Thermostats replace intuition. Timers replace experience. But the relationship remains. Set the heat. Place the food inside. Wait. The environment still carries the process forward. This is why baking feels quieter than other forms of food preparation. Once the oven door closes, the loud work is finished. Movement slows. Sound settles. The transformation happens out of sight. This hidden change reinforces trust. Something is happening, even if it cannot be seen, and it will be ready when the time passes. Understanding the role of enclosed heat helps explain why baking has always been steady rather than stimulating. It relies on systems that work without attention. It replaces reaction with anticipation. It allows people to pause without losing progress. Heat does the work. Time marks the change. The environment holds everything in place. Once the oven is warm and the food is inside, the hardest part is over. Nothing more is required, only waiting. And that waiting has always been one of baking's quiet strengths. Waiting during baking feels different from most other kinds of waiting, not because time moves more slowly, but because time is already decided. Once something enters the oven, the outcome is known. The work is finished. The process is underway. What remains is not uncertainty, but duration. This distinction matters. In many situations, waiting is open-ended. There is no clear signal of when something will end. Attention stays alert, scanning for change. That kind of waiting keeps the mind active. Baking waiting does the opposite. Oven time is defined before waiting begins. Minutes are set. Heat is stable. The endpoint exists from the start. Because of this, the body does not brace. There is nothing to anticipate defensively. Anticipation still exists, but it is calm. It is oriented toward completion, not interruption. This changes how time is perceived. Psychological research on time perception shows that uncertainty stretches subjective time. Predictable intervals feel shorter because they require less monitoring. In baking, there is no need to check constantly, no need to ask what might happen. The answer is already known. Waiting becomes passive rather than active. This passivity is important. When the brain does not need to track progress closely, it releases effort. Internal narration slows. Mental pacing eases. The minutes pass without being counted. People often notice this without realizing why. They sit nearby. They move to another task. They rest. The oven continues working whether attention is given or not. This creates a rare condition. Time passes without urgency and without emptiness. The waiting is full, but not demanding. Another reason baking waiting feels different is predictability of completion. There is a moment when baking ends. The timer sounds. The oven opens. The food emerges. This moment is not vague. It is anticipated clearly. Knowing that completion is coming allows the nervous system to relax during the interval. The body does not prepare for surprise. It prepares for arrival. This shifts waiting from vigilance to patience. Patience is quieter. Patience does not require constant engagement. The structure of baking supports this. The oven isolates the process visually. Once the door is closed, the change is hidden. Nothing new appears to demand attention. This absence of visible fluctuation reduces stimulation. The mind does not need to interpret partial progress. It can trust the system. The oven also introduces rhythm. Timers tick. Heat hums. These sounds are steady and low. Auditory systems respond to consistency by downshifting alertness. Nothing changes suddenly. This steadiness reinforces the sense that waiting is safe. In baking, waiting also has purpose. It is not time wasted. It is time used. Heat is actively transforming ingredients. Knowing this gives waiting meaning. Even without watching, progress is occurring. This prevents the restlessness that comes from feeling idle. The body recognizes that something is happening. Effort has been invested. Reward is forming. This combination is soothing. Effort without outcome creates tension. Outcome without effort feels empty. Baking waiting sits between the two. Effort has already happened. Outcome is guaranteed. Waiting simply connects them. This structure mirrors early baking practices. In ancient ovens, people could not check constantly. Heat was trusted. Waiting was built into the method. Generations learned that patience was not optional and not risky. It was simply part of how food became food. That lineage remains. Even now, when modern ovens allow constant checking, many people do not. They wait. They trust. They know that opening the oven too often disrupts the process. Waiting protects the outcome. This reinforces restraint. Doing nothing becomes part of doing it correctly. This reframes waiting as participation rather than absence. You are still involved, even while still. This is why baking waiting does not feel like delay. It feels like alignment. Time is doing what it is supposed to do. Nothing needs to be rushed. Nothing needs to be corrected. The system holds. Eventually, the waiting ends. Not abruptly, but as expected. This predictability closes the loop. The mind does not remain suspended. It resolves. This resolution contributes to baking's calming effect. Waiting begins with certainty. It unfolds without vigilance. It ends with completion. Few other forms of waiting offer this full arc. Most ask for attention. Baking asks for patience. That difference changes how time is experienced. Minutes soften. Thoughts drift without pressure. The body settles into the interval, knowing it will not last forever. The oven holds the work. Time carries it forward. And waiting becomes what it was meant to be all along. A quiet space between effort and arrival, where nothing needs to be done and nothing is missing. Long before baking is finished, something begins to arrive. Not sight, not touch, smell. As heat works, aromatic compounds lift into the air. They travel outward from the oven, moving through the room gradually. This arrival is unhurried. Smell does not announce itself sharply. It spreads. This matters. The olfactory system is wired differently from other senses. Smell information travels directly to brain regions involved in memory and emotion, without passing through the same layers of conscious filtering as sight or sound. Because of this, scent is processed quickly but gently. It does not demand attention. It invites it. In baking, aroma often becomes the first confirmation that transformation is underway. No checking is required. No visual proof is needed. The smell itself signals progress. This reduces uncertainty. Even without opening the oven, the body knows something is happening. That knowledge is reassuring. Smell arrives before completion, but after waiting has settled. This timing is important. It gives feedback without interrupting patience. The process remains intact. People do not rush to intervene. They simply notice. Aromas from baking are typically warm and rounded. Sugars caramelize. Fats soften and release fragrance. Grains deepen. These scents are complex but familiar. They do not surprise the nervous system. They match expectation. When scent aligns with anticipation, the brain registers coherence. Nothing is wrong. Nothing needs correction. This alignment reinforces trust in the process. Olfactory memory also plays a role. Because smell bypasses many cognitive filters, it easily attaches to past experience. The scent of baking becomes linked to previous moments when waiting ended well. Times when effort resolved into nourishment. Times when food emerged complete. These associations accumulate quietly over life. They do not require conscious recall. The body remembers. When a familiar baking aroma appears, the body often responds before thought. Muscles release slightly. Breathing deepens. The nervous system recognizes the signal. Completion is approaching. Importantly, smell offers confirmation without escalation. It does not demand movement. It does not require looking. It simply exists in the background. This allows waiting to continue calmly. There is no need to rush toward the oven. The aroma will persist. It will deepen. This persistence matters. Short, sharp sensory cues trigger alertness. Long, steady cues support regulation. Baking aromas develop slowly and remain present. They fill space evenly. This steadiness keeps arousal low. Smell also fills the room without direction. Unlike sound or sight, it does not point. It surrounds. This diffuse quality is calming. The body does not orient toward a single source. It rests within the sensory field. Across cultures, the first smell of baking carries similar meaning. Bread browning, cakes rising, pastries warming. Different ingredients, same signal. Something nourishing is almost ready. This universality reinforces trust. It tells the body that what has always worked is working again. In earlier times, smell played an even more important role. Ovens were not transparent. Timers did not exist. Scent was one of the few indicators that baking was progressing correctly. People learned to trust their noses. When the right smell appeared, it meant heat and time were aligned. Too little aroma meant waiting. Too much meant intervention. This skill was learned through repetition. Over time, it became intuitive. Even now, with modern tools, this intuition remains. People notice the smell before the timer. They recognize when something is close to done without checking. This sensory knowledge carries forward. Smell also bridges the gap between process and reward. It arrives early enough to create anticipation, but late enough to maintain certainty. The outcome is not in question. Only timing remains. This makes anticipation pleasant rather than anxious. Anticipation with uncertainty creates tension. Anticipation with certainty creates calm expectancy. Baking aromas belong to the second kind. They allow the body to prepare gently for arrival. Salivation begins. Posture shifts slightly. These changes are subtle and non-urgent. They reflect readiness, not demand. The aroma does not hurry the moment. It accompanies it. By the time baking is complete, smell has already prepared the body. The transition from waiting to completion feels smooth. There is no jolt. The system has been informed gradually. This is why smell plays such an important role in baking's calming effect. It provides confirmation without disruption. It reassures without instruction. It allows patience to remain intact while signaling that the end is near. In baking, scent becomes the quiet messenger. It arrives softly, lingers steadily, and fades naturally once its work is done. A reminder that transformation is happening, that waiting is worthwhile, and that something familiar will soon be ready. No checking required, no urgency introduced, just a gentle signal carried through the air, doing exactly what it has always done. When baking is finished, the body is the first to receive it. Before thought, before evaluation, touch arrives. A surface that yields, a crust that breaks softly, a crumb that compresses and returns. Texture matters. Baked foods are structured but not rigid. They hold shape without resisting. This balance is important. Softness signals safety to the body. It tells the nervous system that effort is no longer required. Hard foods demand force. Soft foods invite ease. Chewing begins slowly. The jaw moves rhythmically. Pressure is applied and released. This repetitive motion has a calming effect. Research in somatic regulation shows that slow, rhythmic jaw movement can reduce muscular tension in the face and neck. The body interprets this movement as non-threatening. Eating baked food does not require urgency. There is no tearing, no crunch that startles. Each bite follows the last. Sweetness arrives alongside texture, not sharp, not overwhelming. Sweetness in baked foods is distributed. It unfolds gradually. This matters. Sudden sweetness can stimulate. Gradual sweetness reassures. Sugar in baked form is tempered by fat and grain. It does not spike sensation. Instead, it spreads. The body registers energy without alarm. Biologically, sweetness signals availability. It tells the system that resources are present. That effort has paid off. This signal is old. Long before refined sugar, sweetness meant survival. It meant ripe fruit, honey, dense calories. When sweetness appears in a baked form, it carries that signal forward, but the structure of baking slows it down. Chewing moderates intake. Texture regulates pace. This combination prevents escalation. Pleasure arrives without urgency. Satisfaction builds without demand. The mouth plays a key role here. Oral sensory input is closely tied to regulation. Soft textures stimulate receptors associated with calm engagement. The rhythm of chewing reinforces this. Each bite follows the same pattern. Pressure, release, pause. This repetition mirrors earlier baking motions. Stirring, folding, waiting. The process resolves into the same rhythm it began with. Taste remains consistent across bites. There are no sudden shifts. This consistency reduces vigilance. The body does not scan for change. It settles into the pattern. Importantly, baked sweetness does not require interpretation. There is no need to decide if it is good. The body already knows. Texture and sweetness combine to create a clear signal. The process is complete. The outcome is safe. The effort is finished. This clarity matters. When outcomes are ambiguous, the nervous system stays active. When outcomes are clear, it powers down. Baked foods offer this clarity reliably. They arrive finished. Nothing more needs to be done. The environment has done its work. The body receives the result. This transfer is smooth. There is no gap between effort and reward. The baked food bridges it. Satisfaction follows without spike. This is why baked sweets feel comforting rather than exciting. They do not demand attention. They do not rush pleasure. They allow it to unfold. Across cultures, this pattern repeats. Soft breads, cakes, pastries, different flavors, same bodily response. Chewing slows, breathing deepens. The body recognizes the signal. Completion has arrived. Importantly, this satisfaction does not linger aggressively. It fades gently. Once the body has received what it needs, sensation recedes. There is no push for more. This restraint is part of baking's calming effect. The structure contains pleasure. It does not let it spill. Texture, sweetness, and rhythm work together. They signal nourishment without stimulation. They allow enjoyment without escalation. This is why baked foods fit naturally at the end of effort. They close loops. They mark transitions. They tell the body it can stop working now. Nothing else is required. The work was done earlier. The waiting passed. The transformation completed itself. Now, the body rests in the result. Softness under the teeth. Sweetness spreading slowly. A clear ending. A quiet reward. And a sense, carried through the mouth and into the body, that everything that needed to happen has already happened. The mind recognizes this signal and lets go. Baking does not require company. It works just as steadily when done alone. In solitude, nothing essential changes. The sequence remains intact. The outcome stays predictable. This matters. Many activities feel heavier when no one is present. They expose the self. They invite evaluation. Baking does not, because baking is not performative. There is no audience, no reaction to anticipate, no standard to meet beyond completion. The steps do not ask how well they are being done. They only ask to be followed. This removes pressure. In solitary baking, attention stays anchored to the process. Hands measure. Ingredients combine. Heat is set. Nothing reflects back judgment. The method carries itself forward. This creates a particular kind of control. Not control over outcome, but control over initiation. You decide when to begin. You decide what to prepare. After that, responsibility is released. Once the oven takes over, the work is no longer personal. This balance matters. Too much control creates strain. Too little creates uncertainty. Baking sits between the two. Preparation is deliberate. Waiting is inevitable. In solitude, this transfer feels especially clear. There is no need to narrate actions. No need to explain timing. No need to adjust pace. Silence fits naturally around the work. The environment supports it. Sounds remain minimal. Movements stay contained. This low stimulation allows repetition to settle. Tasks repeat without variation. Measure, middle weight. Repetition without interruption reduces internal commentary. The mind does not need to interpret what it is doing. It simply follows the sequence. This distinguishes baking from solitary activities that invite rumination. Some tasks leave open space that thoughts rush to fill. Baking fills that space gently. It occupies attention just enough. Not too much, not too little. This balance prevents drift into self-judgment. There is also clarity in how solitary baking ends. The result will be whatever it becomes. There is no one to impress, no feedback loop to manage. This removes comparison. Without comparison, tension lowers. If something turns out slightly differently than expected, the process absorbs it. A darker edge, a softer center. These are variations, not failures. The sequence still resolves. This tolerance lowers the stakes of doing. When stakes are low, effort feels lighter. Solitary baking also allows pacing to remain internal. There is no need to match another person's rhythm. No need to synchronize movement. Pauses can happen naturally. Waiting becomes easier when it does not need to align with anyone else's time. This autonomy supports calm. The body moves at its own speed. Breathing aligns with motion. Time stretches gently rather than dragging. Importantly, solitude here does not create emptiness. The process itself provides presence. The oven hums, ingredients respond. Heat works steadily. There is activity without demand. This prevents loneliness from forming. Loneliness emerges when attention turns inward, without anchor. Baking provides an anchor. It holds attention outward, but not socially. This combination is rare. It allows being alone without being alone with the self. The structure carries attention forward. Each step leads predictably to the next. The ending is known. This predictability supports emotional neutrality. Nothing dramatic unfolds. Nothing requires resolution beyond completion. This neutrality is regulating. It allows the nervous system to rest without suppression. There is no need to feel better, only to continue. When baking finishes in solitude, the result feels complete. Not validated, not judged, simply finished. This closure matters. It marks the end of effort clearly. The body receives the signal. Work has resolved. Something remains. And this resolution occurs without witness. That is important. It reinforces that effort, does not require recognition to be worthwhile. The reward exists regardless. This builds quiet confidence, not pride, not achievement. Trust in the sequence. Over time, solitary baking becomes familiar. The pattern is recognized early. The mind knows what will happen next. This familiarity reduces resistance to beginning. Starting feels easy because ending is certain. This is why people often bake alone during quiet hours, late evenings, early mornings, moments when external demands recede. Baking fits these spaces. It fills time without filling the mind. It offers structure without pressure, completion without performance. In solitude, baking reveals one of its core strengths. It allows doing without being seen, waiting without being judged, receiving without explanation. Heat works, time passes, transformation completes, and when it ends, nothing more is required. The result exists on its own. Steady, finished. The mind recognizes this stability. settles into it alone but not lonely. Baking also moves outward easily. What is made can be given. This shift changes very little about the process, but it changes the meaning. When baked food is prepared for others, it becomes a form of communication, not expressive, not explanatory, practical. Food is offered, it is received. Nothing needs to be said. This simplicity matters. Many forms of care require interpretation. They can be misunderstood. They can create obligation. Baked food avoids this. It is concrete. Something exists where there was nothing before. The act of giving baked food does not ask for response. It does not require gratitude to be effective. The nourishment stands on its own. This makes baking a low-pressure way to extend care. The giver prepares the food privately. The effort happens without audience. By the time the food is shared, the work is already complete. There is no performance attached to the giving. This removes tension on both sides. The recipient does not need to react in a particular way. They can accept quietly. They can consume later. The exchange is flexible. Baked food also carries time within it. The recipient understands that effort was invested earlier. Heat was set. Waiting occurred. This knowledge is implicit. No explanation is needed. The form itself communicates care. This is why baked goods are often used in moments where words feel insufficient after loss, during illness, at transitions. In these moments, verbal reassurance can feel inadequate or intrusive. Food allows presence without pressure. The receiver can engage at their own pace. They can eat when ready. They can save it. The care does not expire quickly. Baked food also reduces hierarchy in giving. It is not extravagant. It is not symbolic of status. It is familiar. This familiarity equalizes the exchange. The focus stays on nourishment, not on gesture. Sharing baked food does not demand conversation. It does not demand closeness. It allows connection to exist without emotional labor. This mirrors baking's communal origins. Shared effort, shared outcome. Even when the baking is done alone, the sharing extends the circle. The act of giving also closes the baking process. Preparation and waiting resolve into offering. The loop completes. This closure matters psychologically. It transforms private effort into shared benefit. The work feels purposeful beyond the self, but not in a dramatic way. Quietly. Baked food is also easy to receive. It does not require immediate consumption. It does not interrupt. This flexibility makes it compatible with many lives. People can accept without rearranging their schedule. This lowers resistance. Care arrives gently. Across cultures, baked foods occupy this role consistently. Bread left at a door, cakes brought to gatherings, pastries shared at transitions, different forms, same function. Nourishment becomes a medium of care. This universality suggests something fundamental. Baked food is trusted. It is seen as safe, as familiar, as non-intrusive. This trust allows it to move easily between people. The giver trusts the method. The recipient trusts the food. This mutual trust supports connection without negotiation. Importantly, giving baked food does not demand reciprocity. It is not a trade. The act stands alone. This removes pressure from the relationship. Care can exist without accounting. This is rare. Many forms of giving create imbalance. Baked food does not. It is consumed. It disappears. The relationship remains unchanged. This ephemerality matters. It allows generosity without long-term obligation. The care is complete once the food is eaten. There is no lingering debt. This makes baking an accessible form of kindness. People can give without fear of overstepping. Recipients can receive without discomfort. The exchange resolves naturally. When baked food is shared, the baker does not need to be present. The care travels on its own. This autonomy is important. It allows connection across distance, across time. Someone eats later and still receives the benefit. The act continues beyond the moment of exchange. This gives baking a quiet reach. Effort invested earlier arrives gently later. No explanation attached, no performance required. Just nourishment, offered and received. This is why baking for others feels different from many other acts of giving. It is simple. It is complete. It does not demand anything in return. The process holds, from preparation to waiting to sharing. The loop closes without strain. The baker returns to their life. The recipient continues with theirs. Something warm passes between them, and then it is gone, leaving only the sense that care occurred, without pressure, without words, without needing to be noticed. The mind recognizes this as safe and allows the connection to exist quietly as it was meant to. Wherever baking appears, the structure is familiar. The ingredients change, the flavors shift, the shapes vary, but the method remains. Across continents and centuries, people have discovered the same sequence. Prepare simple ingredients. Apply steady heat. Wait. This repetition is not coincidence. It reflects a shared solution to the same problem. How to turn raw materials into reliable nourishment, using time rather than force. In the Middle East, flatbreads bake quickly against hot surfaces. In Europe, loaves rise and set in enclosed ovens. In Asia, steamed and baked hybrids use controlled heat in different forms. Different outcomes. Same logic. Even where ovens differ, the principle holds. Enclosed warmth, measured time. In some cultures, baking occurs in tandoors dug into the earth. In others, in clay domes or stone chambers. The materials vary based on environment. The behavior of heat does not. Once heat is enclosed, it becomes predictable. This predictability allows transformation to occur without constant attention. The universality of this method suggests something important. Baking is not tied to a specific culture. It emerges wherever people work with grain and heat. This makes baked food some of the most recognizable across the world. They may not taste the same, they may not look the same, but they feel the same. Soft interiors, set structures, reliable completion. This familiarity allows baked comfort to travel easily. People recognize it even when encountering unfamiliar flavors. The body responds to structure before taste. Texture, warmth, and sweetness register first. This is why baked foods often feel comforting even in new cultural contexts. The method signals safety. Across cultures, baking is also tied to rhythm. Certain days, certain seasons. Bread baked daily. Cakes reserved for festivals. This pattern appears repeatedly. Baking aligns with time cycles rather than spontaneity. It fits into life where planning is possible. This alignment supports calm. When food preparation follows known rhythms, it reduces uncertainty. People know when nourishment will arrive. This predictability has psychological weight. It allows attention to settle. Baking across cultures also tends to occur in similar social contexts. Family kitchens, shared spaces, quiet preparation. Even when done communally, the interaction is low demand. People work alongside one another rather than facing one another. Hands busy, eyes down. Conversation is optional. This social shape repeats. It supports presence without pressure. This consistency suggests that baking carries a social design that works well across human groups. It does not require shared language. It does not require shared values beyond patience. The method itself organizes behavior. This makes baking resilient. It adapts without losing form. When people migrate, they bring baking with them. Recipes adjust to new ingredients. Techniques modify. But the structure persists. This persistence creates continuity across generations. Children grow up recognizing the process even if the flavors change. The method becomes part of cultural memory, not as information, but as pattern. This pattern recognition is powerful. It allows people to feel at ease in unfamiliar settings. A bakery in a new place still smells familiar. The oven hums the same way. The waiting feels the same. This familiarity bridges difference. Baking becomes a shared human language, one that does not require translation. Heat, time, and structure communicate directly with the body. This universality helps explain why baking has survived so many changes. Industrialization, urbanization, modern schedules, the method still fits. It can be scaled up or down. It can be simplified or refined. But its core remains. Across cultures, baking continues to serve the same roles. Nourishment, care, routine. It offers a stable anchor in daily life. This is why baked comfort feels universal. It is not tied to nostalgia for a specific place. It taps into something older, a shared experience of transformation. Raw to cooked, uncertain to reliable, effort to completion. This transformation is recognizable everywhere. When someone encounters baked food, the body understands before the mind. The process has been seen before. It has worked before. Across cultures, baking has carried this message quietly. You can trust this. It will hold. The method is familiar. The outcome is safe. No matter the language spoken, no matter the ingredients used. Baking offers continuity through structure, a shared human rhythm, one that has traveled far, changed its surface, but kept its shape. And in that shared shape, comfort remains. Here's where we stand, clearly and honestly. Baking has a way of returning during difficult periods, not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. Across history, whenever stability breaks, baking reappears in ordinary homes, during wars, during economic collapse, during times when resources narrow and certainty thins. This pattern is consistent. When external systems become unreliable, people turn back to methods that are known to work. Baking is one of those methods. It does not depend on abundance. It depends on structure. Simple ingredients, controlled heat, time. In periods of hardship, these elements remain accessible longer than many others. Even when supply chains falter, grain often remains. Even when fuel is scarce, heat can still be managed carefully. Baking adapts downward. It becomes simpler, more restrained, but it does not disappear. During wartime rationing, sweet baking changed rather than vanished. Sugar was reduced, fats were substituted, recipes adjusted. The form remained. People continued to bake not for indulgence, but for predictability. Daily bread mattered more than variety. The act of preparing food at home restored a sense of control. Not control over circumstances, but control over sequence. Measure, mix, heat, wait. When the outside world feels unstable, internal sequences become important. They create continuity. During economic hardship, baking resurges for similar reasons. Purchased goods become uncertain. Costs rise. Access fluctuates. Baking converts basic materials into nourishment reliably. This reliability reduces cognitive strain. People know what will happen when they begin. The process does not change with the news. The oven behaves the same way regardless of circumstance. This consistency provides relief. Not optimism, not escape. Grounding. Baking also stretches resources. A small amount of grain becomes many servings. Heat is used once to produce food that lasts. This efficiency mattered historically. It still does. But the emotional role is just as important. In hard times, baking restores rhythm. Days that feel blurred gain structure. Certain hours are marked by preparation, others by waiting, others by completion. This segmentation of time reduces overwhelm. The day no longer feels endless. It has shape. During prolonged stress, the nervous system seeks patterns. Predictable routines reduce vigilance. Baking offers a routine that ends well. Effort leads to outcome. Not everything in difficult times resolves. Baking does. This resolution matters. It creates small, contained victories. Not celebratory, not exaggerated, simply finished. These completions accumulate. They remind the body that not all effort is futile. This reminder is subtle but stabilizing. Baking during hardship is often quiet. No announcements, no performances. People bake for themselves, for those nearby. The act does not require explanation. This lowers emotional load. In moments where words fail or feel insufficient, routine continues. The oven does not ask how anyone is feeling. It only requires patience. This neutrality is supportive. It allows care without forcing emotion. Historically, many societies documented increased home baking during crises. Not because people suddenly loved baking more, but because it offered something other activities could not. Reliability without complexity. Predictable timing. A known ending. Even when ingredients were scarce, People baked what they could. Simple loaves, dense cakes, unsweetened breads. The absence of sweetness did not remove the benefit. The structure alone was enough. Heat still transformed. Waiting still resolved. This suggests that baking's comfort is not dependent on indulgence. It is rooted in process. During hardship, baking also becomes intergenerational. Knowledge passes down more intentionally. Children observe. Adults teach through doing. This reinforces continuity. This transmission offers reassurance. Something endured before. It will endure again. In modern times, similar patterns appear. During economic uncertainty or widespread disruption, baking returns to prominence. People seek activities that create tangible results without noise. They turn to processes that do not require interpretation. Baking offers that. It does not solve hardship. It does not distract fully. But it provides a stable point, a place where time behaves normally, where effort resolves, where the body receives a clear signal of completion. This clarity is valuable when much else feels unresolved. Baking becomes a quiet anchor. It does not deny difficulty. It simply exists alongside it. Heat still warms. Time still passes. Food still finishes. The world may be uncertain, but this process holds. And in holding, it allows the mind to rest briefly, knowing that at least one sequence will end the way it always has. That something reliable still remains. And that is often enough to get through the day. Baking works because the changes it relies on are simple and consistent. Not fragile, not sensitive to interpretation. They follow physical rules that behave the same way every time. This is why baking can be repeated with confidence. At the center of baking chemistry is expansion. As heat increases, ingredients respond predictably. Liquids warm and loosen. Fats soften and spread. Gases form and move. Leavening introduces controlled air. Sometimes this air comes from yeast, sometimes from chemical reactions between acids and bases, sometimes from steam. Different sources, same role. Gas expands when heated. As it expands, it pushes outward on surrounding structure. Dough stretches, batter rises. This expansion happens gradually, not explosively. The surrounding matrix, made from flour and liquid, holds the shape long enough for heat to set it. This balance is key. Too much expansion without structure collapses. Too much structure without expansion stays dense. Baking chemistry operates within this narrow, reliable window. Because the ingredients behave consistently, the window is easy to find. Heat then does its quiet work. Proteins unfold and reconnect. Starches absorb moisture and firm. These changes lock structure into place. Once set, the shape holds. This sequence unfolds automatically once conditions are right. No constant adjustment is needed. This autonomy reduces cognitive demand. The baker does not need to manage every moment. They prepare. They apply heat. They wait. The chemistry continues on its own. Importantly, baking chemistry is slow. Changes do not happen all at once. They progress steadily as temperature rises. This gradual shift prevents surprise. There are no sudden reactions that demand immediate response. This makes baking forgiving. Small variations rarely ruin the outcome. A few extra minutes, a slight difference in temperature. The chemistry absorbs these changes. The result remains recognizable. This tolerance is crucial. It allows people to bake without precision stress. The system holds. Baking chemistry also explains why results are repeatable. The same inputs under similar conditions lead to the same transformations. Heat behaves consistently. Expansion follows the same pattern. Setting occurs at predictable thresholds. This reliability builds trust. People learn that if they follow this sequence, the outcome will arrive. They do not need to monitor chemistry actively. The environment manages it. This separation between effort and transformation is calming. It reduces vigilance. The mind does not need to track invisible changes. They will happen whether watched or not. Another important feature of baking chemistry is irreversibility. Once structure sets, it does not revert. Liquids do not ungel. Proteins do not refold. This one-way progression creates certainty. The process only moves forward. There is no oscillation. This directional change mirrors baking's emotional arc. Preparation leads to waiting. Waiting leads to completion. Nothing cycles back. This linearity supports closure. The body recognizes when the process is finished. There is no ambiguity. The chemistry has resolved. Even cooling follows predictable rules. As baked food rests, internal temperatures equalize. Textures settle. Nothing new is introduced. The system quiets naturally. This extended settling phase continues the calming effect. The chemistry does not stop abruptly. It fades. This gradual taper prevents jarring transitions. Understanding baking chemistry reveals why the process feels steady rather than stimulating. It relies on changes that are slow, directional, and reliable. There are no sudden thresholds that trigger alarm. No volatile reactions, just expansion, setting, and rest. These same principles have held for centuries. Ingredients have changed. Tools have improved. The chemistry has not. This consistency allows baking to be learned intuitively. People do not need to understand the science explicitly. They feel it through repetition. The results reinforce trust. When the same process works again and again, the mind stops questioning. It accepts. This acceptance lowers effort. Baking chemistry supports calm not by being simple to explain, but by being simple to rely on. The changes occur quietly. They do not ask for attention. They do not demand control. Heat rises, structure forms, expansion resolves, and when the process finishes, it does so completely. Nothing remains uncertain. The chemistry has done its work. The environment returns to stillness. The result sits where it was placed. Solid, finished. The body senses this finality, and the mind releases, knowing the system behaved exactly as expected. Baking affects the nervous system, not through stimulation, but through predictability. Nothing unexpected happens. The same steps occur in the same order. The same cues appear at the same points. This repetition matters. The nervous system is designed to detect change. When change is frequent or unpredictable, vigilance increases. When patterns repeat without variation, vigilance drops. Baking offers this kind of patterned environment. Measure, mix, heat, wait. Each action leads reliably to the next. There is no need to anticipate interruption. This lowers baseline arousal. The body does not stay on alert. Instead, it settles into sequence. Predictability is one of the strongest safety cues the nervous system recognizes. It signals that the environment is stable, that resources are sufficient, that no rapid response is required. Baking provides these signals continuously. The oven hums steadily. Timers count down. Smells arrive gradually. Nothing spikes. These cues allow the nervous system to shift out of defensive mode. Breathing slows. Muscle tone softens. The process itself becomes regulating. Repetition plays a key role here. Repeating the same motions, stirring, folding, placing, creates rhythmic input. Rhythmic movement is known to support regulation. It engages motor pathways that synchronize with breathing and heart rate. The body aligns with the task. This alignment reduces internal noise. Thoughts become less urgent. Attention narrows gently. Importantly, baking repetition has an endpoint. It does not loop endlessly. The nervous system benefits from knowing that repetition will resolve. This is different from compulsive repetition, which lacks closure. Baking repetition moves toward completion. This directionality matters. Completion signals safety. When a process ends cleanly, the nervous system can power down. Baking provides a clear completion signal. The oven turns off. The food emerges. The waiting ends. This closure tells the body that effort is no longer required. Another important factor is containment. During baking, stimulation stays within a narrow range. There are no loud noises, no sudden movements, no social demands. This containment prevents sensory overload. The nervous system does not need to filter aggressively. It can relax its guard. The predictability of outcome also plays a role. The nervous system is sensitive to uncertainty. When outcomes are unclear, stress responses remain active. In baking, the outcome is known from the beginning. The form may vary slightly, but the category does not. Something baked will appear. This certainty reduces anticipatory stress. The body does not prepare for loss or surprise. It prepares for arrival. This shift from defense to expectation is calming. Baking also provides what can be called earned safety. Safety that follows effort rather than precedes it. The nervous system responds strongly to this pattern. Effort, waiting, reward. This sequence mirrors many regulatory cycles in the body. Activation followed by rest. When this cycle completes cleanly, regulation improves. Baking completes the cycle reliably. The body learns that effort leads to rest. Over time, this learning generalizes. The nervous system becomes more willing to engage because it trusts that disengagement will follow. This trust reduces chronic tension. Baking's effect on the nervous system is not dramatic. There is no sudden calm. Instead, regulation emerges gradually. As repetition continues, as waiting settles, as completion approaches, the body adjusts quietly. This subtlety is important. It avoids triggering alert systems. Nothing announces itself as calming. The system simply shifts. Even the sensory signals involved are non-threatening. Warmth rather than heat, soft textures rather than sharp, steady sounds rather than abrupt. These cues reinforce the message. Everything here is within safe limits. This is why baking is often returned to during stress. Not because it distracts fully, but because it stabilizes. It gives the nervous system a pattern it can trust. One that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This structure supports regulation without requiring intention. People do not need to bake to relax. Relaxation emerges because the process aligns with how the nervous system works. Predictable effort, contained stimuli, stimulation, clear completion. These elements work together. They allow the body to downshift without force. The mind does not need to convince itself that it is safe. The environment demonstrates safety through consistency. Over time, the nervous system remembers this pattern. It associates baking with resolution, with effort that ends, with waiting that does not stretch endlessly. This memory becomes embodied. The next time baking begins, regulation starts earlier. The body recognizes the sequence. It knows how this will go. And because it knows, it lets go sooner. This is the quiet power of baking on the nervous system. Not excitement, not escape, but alignment. The process fits the system. And when a process fits, the nervous system does what it does best. It settles, it releases, it rests. The mind recognizes the pattern and follows it calmly to its natural end. Baking takes place within a space that rarely changes. The kitchen. This environment matters more than it seems. Kitchens are designed around repetition. Counters remain where they always are. Appliances stay in fixed positions. Tools return to the same drawers. This predictability reduces sensory demand. The body does not need to orient itself repeatedly. It already knows where things are. This familiarity creates containment. Containment is the feeling that an activity has clear boundaries. A defined beginning, a defined space, a defined end. The kitchen provides this naturally. It holds the process without expanding outward. When baking begins, attention stays within the room. Ingredients are gathered from nearby. Movements are small. Tasks are localized. Nothing pulls awareness far away. This narrowing of space helps focus remain gentle rather than sharp. The environment supports the task rather than competing with it. Lighting is usually steady. Sounds are muted. Textures are consistent. These conditions reduce sensory variability. The nervous system responds well to environments that change slowly. Fast-changing environments require constant adjustment. Stable environments allow settling. Kitchens tend to be stable. Even when busy, their layout does not shift. The same surfaces receive the same actions over and over. This repetition builds trust. Hands reach for tools without looking. Feet move around obstacles automatically. The body operates on memory rather than vigilance. This lowers effort. The kitchen also separates baking from the rest of life. It acts as a boundary. Work, stress, and outside demands often remain outside the room. Within the kitchen, the task is clear. Prepare food. This clarity reduces mental load. There is no need to decide what the space is for. Its purpose is already known. This reduces choice fatigue. Baking benefits from this clarity. It fits cleanly into the environment. Nothing needs to be adapted. The space was made for this kind of work. Even the surfaces support containment. Counters provide defined areas. Bowls hold ingredients. Pans create edges. Everything has a place. Edges matter psychologically. They help the body understand where things begin and end. When tasks have edges, they feel manageable. Baking tasks are naturally edged. Ingredients are measured. Dough stays in bowls. Food enters the oven. Nothing spills outward conceptually. This prevents overwhelm. The kitchen also offers sensory containment. Smells remain localized. Heat is directed. Sounds are muffled. Unlike open environments, the kitchen keeps sensations close. This prevents sensory flooding. The body can register input without being overwhelmed by it. This containment allows attention to soften. There is no need to brace. The environment is holding the experience. Importantly, the kitchen does not demand performance. It is not a stage. It is a working space. This removes social pressure. Actions can be practical rather than expressive. There is no expectation of elegance. Only function. This practicality supports calm. It allows focus on sequence rather than appearance. Even imperfections feel acceptable. The kitchen absorbs them. Baking also often follows the same path through the kitchen. From counter to sink, from counter to oven. These repeated routes become familiar. Movement becomes efficient. Efficiency reduces cognitive load. The body does not need to plan each step. It follows known paths. This reduces internal chatter. The space guides behavior. Over time, the kitchen becomes associated with resolution. Tasks that begin there tend to end there. Food is prepared. Dishes are washed. Heat is turned off. This sense of completion is reinforced by the environment. The room empties. The lights dim. The space returns to stillness. This closure matters. It signals that effort has finished. The kitchen transitions back to rest. This transition supports nervous system settling. The space itself participates in the regulation. It holds effort, then releases it. This is why baking often feels grounding, not just because of the process, but because of where it happens. The kitchen is a container. It limits scope. It defines boundaries. It supports completion. Within it, tasks feel finite. When environments contain tasks clearly, the mind does not wander far. It stays with what is happening. And when the task ends, attention is free to move on. The kitchen makes this possible. It offers a place where effort begins and ends reliably, where nothing follows you out, where the process fits the space perfectly. In baking, the kitchen does not add stimulation. It removes excess. It holds the experience gently. And when the oven cools and the work is done, the space remains quiet, familiar, ready to hold the next cycle when needed. The mind recognizes this containment and relaxes into it, knowing exactly where it is and exactly what is happening until the moment passes. Alertness, predictable, low variation sounds do the opposite. Baking produces the second kind. At the beginning, there is gentle movement. Ingredients slide into bowls. Flour settles softly. Utensils touch ceramic or metal without force. These sounds are brief and contained. They do not echo. They do not escalate. They signal preparation, not urgency. As mixing begins, rhythm appears. Stirring repeats the same motion. A spoon circles. A whisk taps lightly. The sound is cyclical. Each rotation mirrors the last. Repetition like this supports regulation. The auditory system relaxes when it can predict what comes next. There is no need to listen closely. The pattern is already known. If a mixer is used, the sound remains constant. A low, even hum. No sudden shifts. The volume does not spike. The pitch does not change. This steadiness is important. Consistent sound allows the nervous system to downshift. It fades into the background without disappearing. Attention does not need to track it. Once the food enters the oven, the soundscape simplifies further. The door closes. Movement stops. The oven hums. This hum is one of baking's most distinctive sounds. It is continuous, mechanical, reliable. It does not communicate emotion. It communicates function. Heat is being maintained. Nothing more is required. This signal is reassuring. The sound does not ask for response. It does not demand correction. It exists independently. Auditory research shows that continuous, low-frequency sounds can reduce startle response and support sustained calm. The oven hum fits this profile. It masks sharper environmental noises without adding complexity. Inside the oven, other sounds occur quietly. Batter settles. Moisture evaporates. Structures set. These sounds are subtle, but their presence matters. The environment is active without being loud. Change is happening without announcement. This supports trust. As baking nears completion, new sounds may appear. A faint crackle as surfaces cool slightly. A soft pop as steam escapes. These sounds are not abrupt. They arrive slowly. They signal transition, not interruption. Cooling sounds are especially gentle. As baked food rests, temperature equalizes. The structure relaxes. This creates tiny, irregular noises. They are quiet and brief. They mark settling. This phase mirrors the emotional arc of baking. Effort has ended. Waiting has resolved. Now the system quiets. Nothing escalates. The soundscape tapers rather than stops. This gradual reduction prevents jarring transitions. The auditory environment moves toward stillness naturally. Importantly, baking sounds do not demand interpretation. They do not need to be decoded. There is no alarm to respond to. This absence of interpretive demand reduces cognitive load. The mind does not need to stay alert. It can rest alongside the process. Even silence during baking feels different. It is not empty. It is supported by low-level sound, the oven hum, the occasional settling noise. This prevents the silence from becoming tense. It feels held. Across cultures and kitchens, this sound pattern repeats. Different tools, different ovens, same qualities. Low volume, predictable rhythm. Gradual change and consistency explains why baking sounds are often described as comforting. They do not entertain. They reassure. They tell the body that nothing unexpected is happening, that the environment is stable. That time is unfolding normally. Sound also marks boundaries in baking. Preparation sounds end when the oven closes. Waiting sounds persist. Completion sounds emerge as food cools. These auditory phases mirror the structure of the process. Beginning, middle, end. The nervous system responds well to this clarity. It knows where it is in the sequence. Nothing blurs. This clarity reduces tension. When sound aligns with structure, regulation follows. The body does not brace for surprise. It settles into the rhythm. This is why baking is often associated with quiet domestic comfort, not because it is silent, but because its sounds behave kindly. They repeat, they soften, they fade, they never rush, they never demand. They simply accompany the process until it is complete. The oven hums, the room holds, time passes, and the mind listens without needing to pay attention, resting in the knowledge that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Baking changes how time is experienced, not by making it disappear, but by giving it structure. Minutes are not open-ended. They are measured, defined. When baking begins, time is already shaped. A temperature is set. A duration is chosen. This creates a boundary. The end exists from the beginning. This matters. Unstructured time stretches. It invites monitoring. It keeps attention alert. Structured time behaves differently. When duration is known, the nervous system relaxes its watch. There is nothing to wait for in the abstract. Waiting has a form. Baking introduces gentle pacing. Time moves forward without urgency. There is no need to rush. Rushing does not improve the outcome. In fact, it disrupts it. This reverses many modern time pressures. Most tasks reward speed. Baking rewards patience. Heat does not respond to haste. Chemical change unfolds at its own rate. Trying to compress it leads to failure. This forces alignment. The body must slow to match the process. This alignment reduces internal friction. The rhythm of baking encourages presence without pressure. Nothing else can be done to make it finish sooner. This acceptance softens resistance. The minutes no longer feel like obstacles. They feel like part of the work. Psychological studies on time perception show that when waiting is purposeful and predictable, subjective time feels shorter. Baking meets both conditions. Purpose is clear. Predictability is high. The waiting is not empty. Transformation is occurring. Even when unseen, the knowledge that something is happening fills the interval. This prevents restlessness. People do not check the clock repeatedly. They check once, then trust. This trust frees attention. Time becomes a container rather than a threat. The pacing of baking also includes natural pauses, moments where nothing is required. These pauses are built in. They are not delays, they are the process. This reframes stillness. Doing nothing becomes correct behavior. The nervous system responds positively to this reframing. It reduces the urge to fill space. Silence becomes acceptable. Another factor in baking's effect on time perception is irreversibility. Once the oven is set, time only moves forward. There is no backtracking. This removes decision loops. The body does not wonder if it should act. It knows waiting is the only option. This clarity reduces cognitive load. When choices are removed, effort decreases. Time flows more smoothly. Baking also breaks time into phases: preparation, waiting, completion. Each phase has a clear beginning and end. This segmentation helps the brain track progress without effort. The day feels organized. Even when nothing else is scheduled, baking provides structure. Time is no longer amorphous, it has shape. Importantly, baking time is not competitive. There is no benchmark, no comparison. The process takes as long as it takes. This removes performance anxiety. The nervous system does not brace for judgment. Time is allowed to pass at its natural pace. This allowance is calming. Over repeated experiences, the body learns this pattern. It associates baking with time that behaves kindly. Not rushing, not dragging, simply unfolding. This association becomes embodied. The next time baking begins, the system relaxes sooner. The body remembers how this goes. Time will be measured. Waiting will resolve. Nothing will escalate. This memory reduces anticipatory tension. Even the end of baking does not disrupt the flow. Completion arrives gradually. The oven turns off. Cooling begins. Time tapers rather than stops. This gentle transition prevents jarring shifts. The experience ends the way it began, quietly. Baking teaches the body that time does not always need to be chased. Sometimes time can be trusted. It can be set in motion and allowed to finish its work. This lesson carries beyond the kitchen. The nervous system remembers that not all waiting is threatening. Some waiting is simply part of a process that works. When time behaves predictably, the body does not resist it. It settles into the interval. It stops counting. The minutes pass without friction. This is why baking often feels like time slowing. Not because it actually slows, but because it stops demanding attention. Time becomes background rather than foreground. The body aligns with the process. The environment holds the pace. And the mind experiences time not as pressure, but as passage, moving forward, steadily, until the moment arrives exactly when it is meant to. Baking often finds its place near the end of the day, not as a task to complete, but as a way to close. Evening baking carries a different tone than daytime preparation. Movement slow, lighting softens, the pace of the home changes. This context matters. As the day winds down, the nervous system looks for signals that effort is ending. Baking provides those signals clearly. Preparation happens earlier. Waiting follows. Completion arrives gently. There is no rush to consume immediately. The process itself becomes part of winding down. Evening baking tends to involve familiar recipes. Nothing experimental, nothing uncertain. This predictability reduces cognitive load. The mind does not need to problem solve. It follows a known path. This familiarity signals safety. The body recognizes that nothing unexpected will be asked of it. Sweet baking in the evening carries particular weight, not indulgent, not stimulating, measured. Sweetness at this time of day does not energize. It comforts. The body reads it as closure rather than fuel. This is partly biological. In the evening, metabolism naturally slows. The nervous system shifts toward rest. Sweetness paired with softness supports this shift. It does not demand action. It encourages settling. Evening baking also reinforces routine. Certain nights, certain smells, certain outcomes. Routine builds association. Over time, the body learns that these cues precede rest. The oven hum in the evening feels different from the oven hum at midday. It carries finality. The work of the day is done. Nothing else needs to be produced. Waiting during evening baking feels especially calm. The day's demands are no longer pending. The outcome is not needed urgently. This removes pressure. Waiting becomes purely transitional, a bridge between activity and rest. This transition matters. Abrupt shifts into sleep can be difficult. The nervous system benefits from gradual change. Baking provides that gradient. Preparation engages gently. Waiting slows. Completion resolves. Each phase steps the system down. The smell of baking in the evening plays a role here. It fills the space softly. It does not call for attention. It lingers. This lingering allows the body to adjust gradually. There is no sudden signal, only accumulation. When baking finishes in the evening, consumption is often slower. Small portions, unhurried bites. Chewing becomes rhythmic. The body interprets this as safety. There is no need to eat quickly. Nothing else follows. This lack of follow-up matters. The nervous system does not stay alert for the next task. The baked food marks the end. Even when baking is done for the next day, the effect remains. Knowing something is prepared reduces uncertainty. Tomorrow feels less demanding. This forward containment supports rest. The body does not need to plan ahead aggressively. Something is already handled. Evening baking also tends to happen in quieter spaces. Fewer interruptions. Lower noise. The kitchen becomes calmer. This environmental shift reinforces the internal one. Importantly, baking before sleep does not demand productivity. The result does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be shared. It simply needs to exist. This removes performance pressure. Effort is allowed to be modest. Completion is enough. The association between baking and sleep builds gradually. One evening at a time, the body begins to recognize the sequence. Preparation, waiting, closure, rest. This learning is implicit. No intention is required. Over time, starting to bake in the evening begins to cue the nervous system automatically. Breathing slows sooner. Muscle tension releases earlier. The body knows what comes next. This is why many people return to baking during late hours, not for the food alone, but for the feeling of resolution it brings the day. Something has been finished. The environment quiets. Nothing is pending. Heat fades. Smell lingers. The system prepares for stillness. Baking before sleep does not stimulate. It signals completion. It tells the body that effort has resolved, that waiting has ended, and that nothing more is required tonight. The mind receives this signal clearly and begins to let go. Not abruptly, not forcefully, but in the same way baking always works. Gradually, predictably, until rest arrives on its own. Baking often extends beyond the moment it finishes. What is made does not disappear immediately. Something remains. Leftovers carry quiet meaning. They represent effort that continues to provide. This matters. Uncertainty creates tension when the future feels empty. Leftovers soften that uncertainty. They introduce continuity. Knowing that food is already prepared changes how the next day feels. There is less to solve, less to plan. This reduces cognitive load. The body senses that something is already handled. This forward reassurance is subtle but stabilizing. Leftover baked food also changes the relationship with time. The effort invested earlier stretches forward. Work done once continues to resolve later. This extends the arc of baking beyond its immediate completion. The process does not end at the oven. It carries on quietly. This extension reinforces trust. Effort is not fleeting. It produces something that endures. This endurance matters psychologically. When actions create lasting results, the nervous system relaxes its grip. There is less need to remain alert. Leftovers also preserve structure. The food is already shaped, already finished. Nothing unpredictable will emerge. The future interaction is known. Warm, soft, familiar. This predictability reduces anticipatory stress. The body does not brace, it recognizes the pattern. Leftover baked goods are especially effective at this. They do not degrade quickly. They remain stable. This stability communicates safety. The presence of leftovers also changes how rest is experienced. Sleep comes easier when the next day does not feel demanding. Knowing that something is waiting reduces morning urgency. The body can rest more fully. This is why baking often happens in advance. Not because it saves time alone, but because it shifts emotional load. Preparation reduces future pressure. Leftovers function as reassurance. They tell the system that care has already been extended forward. This message does not require conscious thought. It is felt. The kitchen holds something ready. This readiness alters perception of tomorrow. Tomorrow feels lighter. The body does not anticipate scarcity. It anticipates continuity. Leftovers also reinforce closure. The baking process ended well. The result remains. Nothing is unresolved. This completion lingers. The nervous system carries it into rest. Even small amounts matter. A single slice, a portion saved. These are not about abundance, they are about certainty. The body responds strongly to certainty. Leftovers also allow pacing. Consumption can happen later. There is no rush. This absence of urgency supports calm. Nothing must be used immediately. The food will wait. This waiting is different from baking waiting. It is passive. No heat involved. No transformation pending. Just presence. Something exists. This existence reduces internal pressure. The body does not need to solve for hunger or effort right away. That work is already done. Leftovers also support autonomy. The choice of when to eat remains open. There is flexibility. Flexibility reduces stress. It allows the system to move at its own pace. Importantly, leftovers do not demand attention. They sit quietly. They do not signal alarm. They do not create obligation. They simply remain. This quiet persistence is comforting. It allows the nervous system to release. Across cultures, saving baked food has long been part of daily rhythm. Bread set aside, cakes covered, pastries wrapped. These acts preserve more than food. They preserve assurance. They tell the body that nourishment is continuous, that the cycle does not start from zero each day. This continuity is grounding. It reduces the sense of starting over. The presence of leftovers bridges one day to the next. It smooths the transition. The body moves into sleep knowing that something remains. Not everything resets overnight. This knowledge changes how rest feels. It deepens it. Baking that leaves something behind carries forward its calming effect. The heat may fade, the smell may soften, but the result stays. Waiting is no longer required. The work is complete. Something finished is still available. This forward extension of comfort is one of baking's quiet strengths. It allows calm to persist beyond the moment, beyond the kitchen, into tomorrow. The mind recognizes this continuity and settles more easily, knowing that not everything needs to be done again, that something familiar will still be there, waiting, ready, unchanged. Baking often becomes a quiet presence rather than an event. Over time, it stops feeling like something that happens and starts feeling like something that accompanies. This shift matters. When an activity becomes familiar enough, it no longer asks for attention. It simply exists alongside daily life. Baking fits this role naturally. It does not interrupt. It does not announce itself. It returns when needed and recedes when finished. This makes baking a kind of companion. Not interactive, not demanding, steady. A companion does not require conversation. It does not need to be understood. It is present without expectation. Baking offers this same quality. The process unfolds in the background of life. Ingredients appear. Heat is applied. Waiting occurs. Nothing insists on being noticed. This quiet companionship reduces emotional load. The body does not feel alone with effort. Something familiar is underway. The structure holds. Baking also carries memory without attachment. Past experiences inform expectation, but they do not intrude. The smell of baking may recall earlier moments, but it does not force them forward. The past remains gentle. This is important. Memories that arrive without demand are comforting. They do not pull the nervous system backward. They sit alongside the present. Baking allows this kind of memory to surface softly. The process does not ask for reflection. It simply repeats. This repetition creates familiarity without stagnation. Each instance is slightly different, yet the pattern holds. This balance supports trust. The body recognizes the shape of the experience. Nothing novel needs to be managed. Baking's companionship is also non-judgmental. There is no evaluation of mood, no requirement to feel a certain way. You can bake while tired, while distracted, while quiet. The process does not change. This neutrality is rare. Many activities respond to emotional state. Baking does not. It accepts presence as it is. This acceptance lowers pressure. It allows the body to engage without self-monitoring. Even when baking is not happening, the possibility remains. The kitchen holds the tools. The oven waits. This availability creates a sense of support, not active potential. Knowing that baking is available if needed changes how space feels. The environment becomes less empty. The option remains. This potential companionship matters during quiet moments. It offers reassurance without obligation. Baking does not need to be chosen. It does not call. It simply stays. When baking resumes, the relationship picks up without negotiation. No reintroduction, no adjustment. The process begins again, as it always has. This continuity builds trust. The body knows what will happen. The mind does not question the sequence. This familiarity allows the process to function as emotional resolution, not because it fixes anything, but because it remains stable. In times of uncertainty, stable companions matter. They anchor attention. They reduce drift. Baking offers that anchor without attachment. It does not ask for focus. It does not demand interpretation. It simply occupies space gently. The presence of baking can also soften silence, not through sound or conversation, but through activity. Something is happening, quietly. This prevents stillness from becoming emptiness. The room feels held. Even when alone, there is structure. The process gives shape to time. Baking as companion is not constant. It comes and goes. This is part of its strength. It does not overwhelm. It does not linger unnecessarily. It appears when invited and leaves when finished. This balance prevents dependence. The relationship remains healthy. The comfort does not become a requirement. It remains an option. This optionality is calming. It removes pressure. The body knows that support exists, but is not imposed. Baking has always offered this form of companionship. Through repetition, through structure, through predictability. It stays consistent even as circumstances change. This consistency allows the nervous system to relax around it. The presence does not shift. It does not surprise. It does not withdraw suddenly. It simply behaves as expected. When baking becomes a companion, it no longer needs to be sought for comfort. Comfort arrives as a byproduct. The process fits into life without disruption. Heat, time, transformation, again and again, quietly. The mind recognizes this steady presence and rests alongside it without needing to engage, without needing to explain, without needing to resolve anything at all. As baking comes to rest, nothing needs to be concluded. There is no lesson to take away, no final point to remember. The process does not end so much as it settles. Heat fades slowly. The oven cools. The room returns to stillness. What was active becomes quiet. The smell lingers a little longer, then thins, then disappears. Nothing rushes. Baking has already done what it needed to do. Ingredients were gathered. Time was given shape. Waiting resolved. Something finished appeared. That is enough. The comfort of baking was never meant to be held tightly. It was meant to pass through. Like warmth that fades from the hands, or light that softens at the end of the day. The body remembers it without effort. The sequence remains available. It can be returned to whenever needed. There is no urgency to repeat it, no pressure to continue. The space stays ready. Somewhere else, another oven is warming. Another bowl is being filled. Another moment of waiting is beginning. Baking continues quietly, whether noticed or not. The rhythm remains. Heat, time, transformation, again and again. Nothing needs to be done now. The process has completed itself. The room holds what remains. The day moves forward, and the mind can rest, knowing that this steady sequence exists in the world, unchanged, reliable, and always ready to return when the moment calls for it.